Why is this year's influenza so dangerous?
Well, there's two things that are happening right now that cause us to be a little concerned. Number one, the number of flu cases that we're detecting is much higher than we would expect to see at this point in time in any average year. And the strains that are causing the flu are ones that we would normally not expect to see until the end of the flu season. So those two things are causing us to be a little bit wary about what's happening and what the beginning of this flu season is really going to be like.
And if we look back at the 2017-2018 influenza season, there were 61,000 total deaths and 810,000 hospitalizations. So it's not something to take lightly. There are really, humongous consequences to not getting vaccinated, for example. But do vaccinations work? Are they enough, I should say, Doctor?
Yeah, so vaccinations do work. The flu vaccine that we use right now is not the greatest, but it can provide on good years up to about 60% protection from influenza. And importantly, it also provides very significant protection from hospitalization and from death from influenza. And it's those extremes that we're really worried about in terms of our annual flu epidemics. And I think flu oftentimes is not considered as serious a disease because we hear about it all the time. We hear about it in annual epidemics. But those numbers that you quoted should bring home to people just how serious a disease it really is.
And vaccination, to quote the other end of the scale, it actually prevented an estimated 6.2 million influenza illnesses last year. So that's the positive side of the numbers too. Dr. Pekosz, why are we seeing such an outbreak in the south so early and so strong this year?
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult for us to know why, but it's not uncommon for us to see influenza peak at different parts of the country at different times of the year. We tend to think about flu as just one sort of simple homogeneous disease, but 4 different viruses can cause influenza. Your vaccine actually consists of all 4 of those viruses. And if you look at the influenza maps in any particular year, you can see that influenza peaks at different parts of the countries at different times of the year. So it's a disease that really is very sort of surprising in terms of what strains appear and where in the country it can appear, as well as in how severe the epidemics can be. And it's something that we really don't understand that well.
Yeah, it's fascinating, the simplest of diseases and still so much research needing to be done. Tell us why we should disbelieve people who say, oh, don't get the influenza vaccine, it will give you the flu.
Well, the vast majority of people who get the influenza vaccine get the influenza shot, which is an injection into the arm. So that vaccine is made up of killed virus, and that virus is actually taken and ripped in half, and the other half is put into a part of your body, the arm, that the influenza virus never sees during its normal infection. So, there really is no chance that you can catch influenza from the vaccine. You can have some of the modest side effects of the influenza vaccine, which is redness at the site of injection. Oftentimes people complain that they can't lift their arm up all the way without a little bit of pain. But those are actually good signs. Those are signs that the vaccine is working, that your immune response is kicking in, and that you're generating that protective immunity that you need to fight off influenza during the flu season.
And of course, the other reason is the greater good, right? We can't all sort of decide that if we're healthy, we don't need the virus because we could be potential carriers and there are unhealthy among us that would be affected by that.
Absolutely. The groups that suffer the most from influenza are the very young, those above the age of 65, and people that have medical conditions such as asthma or heart disease or diabetes or obesity. And it's those same groups that the flu vaccine doesn't really work that well in. So if the healthy population would take a higher level of the flu vaccine, then we can provide that herd immunity that would have the ripple effects of protecting those other more vulnerable populations from influenza.
Very briefly, Doctor, how far are we from eradicating influenza?
So over the past 3 years, the National Institutes of Health in the U.S. has really invested a large amount of money in what they call the Universal Flu Vaccine Project. And that's designed to make a vaccine that will protect against more strains of flu and that will have at least a 5-year efficacy. And clinical trials are starting this year, so we're really hoping that over the next year or two we'll have some sense of how far we are away from rolling out a better flu vaccine.